8 August 1944, approximately midnight, south of Caen, Normandy. The British infantrymen are looking at something that should be an armored fighting vehicle. Tracks, steel, engine, armored hull, but the weapon is missing. The great 105mm gun that once defined the M7 Priest is gone. The fighting compartment is open. The space where ammunition and gun crews once worked is now being filled with infantry. At first glance, it looks wrong. Not unfinished, not damaged, deliberately incomplete. A normal armored vehicle carries men so they can operate a weapon. This one has had the weapon removed so it can carry more men. That is the reversal. And to a British soldier seeing it for the first time, the question is obvious. Why? Why strip a functioning armored vehicle of the thing that makes it dangerous? Why take out the gun days before a major attack? Why send infantry toward German positions inside something that appears to have been dismantled? Ahead of them is the German line. Machine guns, mortars, artillery, anti-tank guns. Villages and strong points that have already cost Allied infantry dearly. The men climbing into these converted vehicles are not being promised safety. There is no roof over everything, no comfort, no elegant rear ramp, no modern troop compartment. They sit inside steel that was never designed around them. The engine vibrates through the hull. Exhaust hangs in the air. Visibility is poor. Getting out under fire will still be dangerous. A direct hit from a heavy anti-tank weapon can still kill everyone inside. This machine is not invulnerable. It is improvised, crude, built under pressure. But that is exactly why it matters. The Canadians are not trying to build a better tank. They are trying to solve a different battlefield problem. For weeks in Normandy, tanks have been able to move through fire that tears infantry apart. The armor keeps going. The men beside it do not always make it. And when the infantry falls behind, the tanks become vulnerable too. So the Canadians have taken an armored hull and asked a different question. What if the steel protects the infantry instead? What if the gun is removed because the empty space is more valuable than the weapon? What if the vehicle does not fight the battle itself? What if it delivers the men who will? Minutes later, the engines begin moving south. British and Canadian troops ride inside machines that only days earlier were self-propelled artillery. No one yet knows whether the idea will survive its first major battlefield test. But before the war is over, British soldiers will not merely understand why the Canadians removed the guns. They will be climbing into Canadian Kangaroos to go into battle themselves. Normandy, summer 1944. From a German defensive position, the problem is easy to see. The tanks come first. Behind them come the men. The tank is wrapped in steel. The infantryman is wrapped in cloth. That difference can decide everything. A German machine gunner does not need to destroy the tank to weaken the attack. He can fire at the infantry around it. Mortar crews can do the same. Artillery can break up the men trying to stay close. The tank may continue moving. The infantry may be forced down. A gap begins to open. 10 yards, 20, 50, then more. And the farther the tank moves from the infantry meant to support it, the more dangerous the battlefield becomes for both. Tanks need infantry. A tank crew can see only so much. Buildings hide men with explosives. Hedges conceal anti-tank teams. Mines stop tracks. Ditches trap vehicles. A German soldier with the right weapon, close enough and unseen long enough, can turn a powerful armored vehicle into a burning obstacle. Infantry searches the ground the tank cannot. Infantry clears houses. Infantry watches flanks. Infantry finds hidden positions. The tank protects the infantry with armor and firepower. The infantry protects the tank with eyes, rifles, and bodies. They are supposed to move together, but Normandy makes that difficult. The terrain south of Caen is not one clean battlefield. It is fields, roads, villages, sunken lanes, hedges, orchards, open ground, German defenders use mortars, machine guns, artillery, and anti-tank weapons from positions that are often difficult to identify until they begin firing. A Sherman can absorb dangers that would immediately force infantry to ground. A man on foot cannot simply ignore fragments striking around him. He cannot cross open ground at tank speed. He cannot remain exposed indefinitely because the tank beside him is still moving. That creates a contradiction. Stay close to the armor, and infantry enters the same killing zones without the same protection. Fall behind, and the tanks become increasingly isolated. Neither choice is good. This is not a uniquely Canadian problem. British troops know it. American troops know it. German troops know it. Every mechanized army has to answer some version of the same question. How do you keep armor and infantry connected when one moves inside steel and the other does not? Trucks can move men quickly, but a truck on a battlefield is not a tank. Universal carriers are useful, but they are lighter and far less protected than a heavy armored hull. Infantry can ride on tanks, but riding on top of armor leaves men terribly exposed to fragments, bullets, and blasts. The battlefield keeps producing the same image. A tank advances. Infantry tries to remain with it. German fire begins. Men scatter toward cover. The tank keeps moving. The relationship starts to break. That is the problem Canadian planners are trying to solve before Operation Totalize. Not how to make the tank more powerful. Not how to put a larger gun on it. How to stop the infantry from being stripped away before it reaches the place where the tanks need it most. And that leads to an even stranger question. If the real problem is protecting infantry, why use the armored vehicle primarily to carry a gun at all? At first, the answer seems obvious. If infantry needs armor, use a tank. But a tank is already full. A Sherman carries a crew, ammunition, fuel, radios, machinery, and a main gun. Almost every part of the vehicle exists because the tank has one primary purpose: fight. Its armor protects the crew, so the crew can operate the weapon. That is what a tank is built around. A truck is the opposite. It is built around carrying men or supplies. It has space. It has speed on roads. It can move an entire group efficiently. But once the road becomes battlefield, the truck's advantages become weaknesses. Thin bodywork does almost nothing against shell fragments. Machine gun fire can tear through it. A mortar barrage can turn transport into a casualty point. The truck carries men. It does not truly shelter them. Then there is the universal carrier. Small, tracked, useful, found almost everywhere in British and Canadian formations. It can move weapons, ammunition, and small groups of soldiers across difficult ground. But it is not protected like a full tank hull. It solves mobility. It does not fully solve protection. So the battlefield problem remains. The Kangaroo reverses the priorities. Take an armored chassis. Remove the heavy weapon. Use the empty fighting space for infantry. The vehicle no longer needs to win a duel against another tank. That is not its job. Its job is to get men closer to the fight while keeping more steel between them and the battlefield. A Sherman carries armor, so a gun can survive. A Kangaroo carries armor, so infantry can survive more of the journey. That difference sounds small. It is not. The first Canadian Kangaroos are converted M7 Priest self-propelled guns. Later, the idea becomes even cleaner with ram tanks. The turret comes off. The main gun disappears. The empty hull becomes a troop space. That is when the transformation becomes literal. They took the turrets off. But not because the tanks were useless. Not because the Canadians had forgotten what a tank was for. They were creating a vehicle for a different relationship between infantry and armor. The idea also has obvious weaknesses. The troop compartment is open above. Dismounting can expose soldiers. There is no modern rear ramp. The interior can be cramped. A mine can still stop the vehicle. A heavy shell can still kill. An anti-tank gun can still penetrate armor. The Kangaroo is not a magic answer. It does not make infantry invulnerable. It does one thing. It reduces how much of the approach to battle infantry must make completely exposed. That alone can be enough to matter. From a British officer's perspective, however, another question remains. Why sacrifice an armored fighting vehicle for this? Why take a machine that already has a gun and deliberately remove it? The answer begins in early August 1944. Because Canadian planners are preparing an attack south of Caen. Because the German defenses are still dangerous. Because surprise will matter. Because infantry must stay with armor. And because Lieutenant General Guy Simonds is about to look at a group of surplus self-propelled guns and see something other than artillery. Early August 1944, Normandy. The fighting south of Caen has already taught the Allies something brutal. Breaking through German defenses is not only about destroying strongpoints. It is about keeping the attack connected long enough to exploit them. Tanks can punch forward. Infantry can follow. Artillery can suppress. Bombers can strike. But if the pieces separate, the attack begins losing force. Lieutenant General Guy Simonds is preparing Operation Totalize. The objective is to break south toward Falaise. The problem is the German defensive system in front of him. Machine guns, mortars, anti-tank guns, prepared positions. And open ground that can expose infantry before it ever reaches the objective. Simonds does not need another explanation of what happens when infantry falls behind armor. Normandy has already provided enough examples. The tanks advance. The infantry is delayed. The Germans recover. The attack becomes fragmented. So Simonds begins looking for a way to protect infantry during the approach. Not after the tanks arrive. With them. That changes the question. Normally, an army looks at an armored vehicle and asks how much firepower it can carry. How large a gun? How much ammunition? How much armor? Simonds asks something different. How many infantrymen can this steel protect? The opportunity appears because Canadian artillery units are changing equipment, leaving a number of M7 Priest self-propelled guns available for another use. These are valuable machines. Tracked, armored, mobile, built around a 105mm howitzer. Normally, removing that gun would sound like destroying the reason the vehicle exists. But Simonds is looking at the hull differently. The gun occupies space. The ammunition occupies space. The crew stations occupy space. Remove them, and the armored box remains. An armored box with tracks. An armored box capable of moving infantry across terrain that would otherwise expose them to machine gun fire and shell fragments. The idea is radical enough that permission matters. The Priests are American equipment, and Canadian official history records that General Harry Crerar obtained approval for their conversion. That detail matters because this is not simply a few soldiers modifying damaged vehicles behind the lines. This is becoming an operational decision. The Canadians are preparing to alter dozens of functioning armored machines immediately before a major offensive. There is risk in that decision. If the concept fails, the vehicles have lost their guns for nothing. If the infantry inside cannot dismount effectively, the carriers may become traps. If German anti-tank guns catch them, armor will not guarantee survival. If the vehicles break down, men may still end up walking into the same fire the conversion was supposed to avoid. Nothing about the idea is proven yet. That is important. The Kangaroo does not begin as a legend. It begins as a question. Can an armored fighting vehicle become more useful to infantry by losing the weapon it was built around? The answer will not be decided in a headquarters. It will be decided in a workshop first, because now the Canadians have only a few days to turn the idea into metal. 3 August 1944, Normandy. The first priest enters the workshop. It still looks like artillery. By the time the men are finished with it, it will not. The 105mm gun has to come out. The mounting has to come out. The fighting compartment has to be cleared. Openings have to be covered. Steel has to be cut, welded, fitted, tested, and then the process has to be repeated. Again, again, again. There is no factory line waiting for this machine. No years of development. No long trial program. There are only men, tools, armored vehicles, and an offensive that will begin in days. An ad hoc workshop detachment is assembled. Canadian official history describes roughly 250 personnel drawn from 13 units, with British soldiers also involved in the work. The project is already becoming more than a Canadian curiosity. Men from different technical backgrounds are trying to solve the same problem under the same deadline. The first pilot vehicle is reportedly completed that evening. That means the idea has moved from paper to steel in hours. The gun is removed. The mantlet is removed. The opening is covered. Armor plate is used where possible. Then the supply of proper armor begins running short. So the workshops improvise again. Mild steel sheets are used. Sand is packed between layers in some areas. It is not elegant. It is not standardized in the way a factory-built vehicle would be. But elegance is not the requirement. The requirement is readiness. That is the strange logic of battlefield engineering. A problem appears at the front. Someone sees a machine built for one purpose, then asks whether it can survive another. The priest was designed to carry artillery forward. Now its gun is gone. Its value has been redefined. The armor remains. The tracks remain. The engine remains. The protected hull remains. The empty space is what matters now. The work continues through 4 August, then 5 August. By the morning of 6 August, Canadian official history records that approximately 76 priests have been converted, 76 machines. 3 days earlier, they were self-propelled artillery. Now they are troop carriers. That speed is part of the story. Not because the conversions were perfect. They were not. Not because every engineering question had been solved. It had not. But because the battlefield problem was urgent enough that an imperfect answer was worth testing. There is another reality. The men doing the conversion will not be the ones deciding whether it worked. Infantry will. They will climb into the open-topped hulls. They will sit where the gun crew once stood. They will ride toward German positions, knowing the armor around them is thicker than a truck, but knowing also that anti-tank fire, mines, heavy artillery, and direct hits remain deadly. The workshop has solved only the first problem. Build the machines. The next question is much darker. What happens when those machines start taking men toward the German line? 7 August 1944. Night, south of Caen. The converted priests are ready. Now the infantry has to enter them. This is where the concept becomes real. A drawing cannot feel fear. A staff plan cannot smell exhaust. A map cannot hear steel tracks grinding through darkness. The soldiers can. British and Canadian infantry begin boarding the carriers allocated for Operation Totalize. The fighting compartments are open above. The interior is not designed like a modern armored personnel carrier. There are no comfortable benches arranged for a smooth ride. No rear ramp waiting to drop open at the objective. The men climb into a machine that was built around artillery, not passengers. They pack into the space created by removing the gun. Close together. Equipment between knees. Rifles held tight. Helmets below the rim of the armor where possible. Then the engines start. The sound changes everything. Inside the hull, the engine is not distant. It is part of the environment. Metal vibrates. Tracks clatter. Voices become harder to hear. The outside world disappears behind steel. The men cannot see the whole battlefield. They hear it instead. Artillery. Engines. Explosions. The occasional metallic strike against armor. Maybe small arms fire somewhere beyond the hull. Maybe nothing for several minutes. Then something again. For a British infantryman, this is an unusual way to approach combat. Normally, the battlefield unfolds in front of him. He sees the hedgerow, the road, the village, the smoke. Inside the Kangaroo, much of that is hidden. He is moving toward danger without seeing every yard of it. That creates a different kind of fear. Not the fear of being exposed. The fear of not knowing. Where are the German guns? How close are they? When will the vehicle stop? When will the order come to get out? The British 51st Highland Division is part of the Totalize attack alongside Canadian formations. For some of those British troops, the strange Canadian conversion is no longer something to inspect from outside. Now it is transport. Now they have to trust the idea, trust the driver, trust the armor, trust the navigation, trust that the machine will get far enough before the infantry has to become infantry again. Because the Kangaroo does not eliminate the final fight. It only changes the journey toward it. At some point, the men still have to climb out, stand up, expose themselves, move into buildings. Crossroads. Attack positions. The carrier cannot capture the objective for them. It can only deliver them closer. The distinction matters. A direct hit from a German anti-tank gun can still tear through the vehicle. A mine can stop it. Heavy artillery can still kill. Men sitting inside steel are not invulnerable simply because they are no longer walking. The machine reduces one kind of vulnerability. It does not erase war. That is why the first test matters so much. If the priests become targets that cannot maneuver, if the infantry becomes trapped, if the carriers lose direction in the darkness, if the German anti-tank defenses catch them in the open, then the experiment may end almost as quickly as it began. The engines start moving south. The Germans are waiting, and the strange armored vehicles with no guns finally enter the battle they were built in 3 days to survive. 8 August 1944. After midnight, south of Caen, Normandy. Operation Totalize begins. The night is full of engines. Armor moves forward in columns. Infantry rides inside the converted priests. Artillery fire rolls ahead of them. Bombers strike deeper targets. Searchlights reflect against cloud and smoke. Everything is designed to create momentum before the German defenses can fully understand what is happening. And somewhere inside the advancing columns are vehicles that, only days earlier, had been artillery. Now they are carrying men. From the German side, the first impression is confusion, noise, flashes, tracks, armored silhouettes coming through darkness. Some are tanks. Some are self-propelled guns. Some look like armored vehicles with something missing. But the Germans do not need to identify every machine immediately. They only need to stop the attack. Anti-tank guns begin firing. Machine guns search for infantry. Mortars and artillery fall across the routes of advance. The battlefield becomes exactly the kind of place the Kangaroo was created for. Inside the carriers, British and Canadian infantry do not experience the attack the way a man walking behind a tank would. They are still afraid. Still vulnerable. Still surrounded by noise. But shell fragments that might tear through a truck or strike a man in the open now have steel to pass through first. Machine gun fire that could force infantry flat may hit armor instead. That is the first real proof of the concept. Not invulnerability, protection, not safety, a better chance of arriving. The Kangaroo does not eliminate the battlefield. It postpones part of it. The men inside still have to dismount. They still have to clear positions. They still have to fight German infantry at close range. But they may begin that fight farther forward, with more men still beside the tanks. That is the whole idea. Keep the relationship intact. Armor and infantry, not separated by hundreds of yards of artillery fire, not one waiting for the other, moving together. The first phase of Totalize achieves a significant penetration. British and Canadian formations break into the German defensive system across a broad front. The attack has moved. The carriers have delivered infantry. The strange machines are still part of the advance. The experiment has survived its first battlefield test. But Totalize is not a clean triumph. Darkness creates problems. Navigation creates problems. Columns drift. Units lose direction. German resistance hardens. Anti-tank weapons remain dangerous. The attack begins losing some of the perfect coordination that the plan depended on. This is important because a new machine can tempt people into telling a simple story. Canadians invented kangaroos. Kangaroos appeared. Attack succeeded. That is not what happened. The battlefield refuses simplicity. A carrier can protect infantry from fragments. It cannot tell a lost column where to go. It can move men through machine gun zones. It cannot guarantee that tanks and infantry will identify the correct objective in darkness. It can reduce exposure. It cannot remove German anti-tank guns. And it cannot protect a formation that drives into the wrong ground. Later in Totalize, Canadian forces suffer severe losses. The destruction of Worthington Force in the second phase becomes one of the operation's most painful examples. Canadian tanks and accompanying troops are caught far from where they were intended to be. German armor and anti-tank fire strike them hard. The Kangaroo does not prevent that. It was never designed to. That distinction protects the history from becoming mythology. The Canadians have not created a machine that makes combined arms easy. They have solved one part of a larger problem. They have found a way to carry infantry through some of the battlefield fire that previously separated men from tanks. That is enough to matter, but not enough to make the attack unstoppable. For the Germans, the new carriers are another problem among many. For the British infantry who rode inside them, the question is now different. They have seen the machine work. Not perfectly. Not safely, but well enough to deliver men through the opening phase. And once an improvised weapon survives its first battle, the real test begins. Do commanders use it again? August 1944. Normandy. Operation Totalize ends without everything its planners hoped to achieve. German forces are still fighting. Falaise has not simply fallen because the first night attack moved forward. Canadian formations have taken casualties. Vehicles have been lost. Men have died inside and outside armor. If the Kangaroo had been nothing more than a desperate experiment, this would be the moment to abandon it. Return the remaining vehicles. Find another answer. Move on. That does not happen. The carriers are used again. Operation Tractable follows on 14 August. The advance toward Falaise continues. Smoke covers movement. Armor pushes forward. Infantry again has to remain close enough to exploit what the tanks create. And the Kangaroo remains part of the solution. The important point is broader. The concept survives Totalize. That is stronger evidence than any dramatic quote. Commanders have seen the disadvantages. They have seen the open tops, the awkward dismounts, the vulnerability to heavy weapons. They have seen confusion during Totalize, and still they want protected infantry transport. That changes the status of the machine. It is no longer simply something built because one offensive is approaching. It is becoming a capability, a battlefield tool worth preserving. But the priests have a problem. They were never designed as troop carriers. They are conversions of self-propelled artillery. Their shape reflects the weapon that used to sit inside them. If this idea is going to continue, a better source vehicle would help. And Canada already has one. The Ram. The Ram tank had been developed in Canada earlier in the war. By 1944, many were no longer required as frontline gun tanks in Northwest Europe because Canadian armored units were largely equipped with Shermans. That leaves armored hulls that can be used differently. Now the original idea evolves. With the Priest, the Canadians removed the artillery gun. With the Ram, they can remove something even more visually dramatic: the entire turret. This is the moment the machine becomes the image people remember. A tank hull, tracks, armor, no turret, no main gun. A circular opening where the fighting compartment once centered on a weapon. And infantry climbing into that empty space. The apparent loss becomes the purpose. The turret is not missing because the tank was destroyed. It is missing because the machine has been redesigned around people instead of a cannon. For a British observer, the logic should now be easier to understand. At Totalize, the concept was emergency improvisation. At Tractable, it is repeated. With the Ram, it becomes more deliberate. This is no longer a strange vehicle being tested once. It is a new way of thinking about armor. Not every armored hull has to exist to fire a large gun. Some can exist to deliver the soldiers those gun tanks need beside them. and the Canadians are about to build an entire unit around that idea. Late 1944, Northwest Europe. The Ram rolls in as a tank. It comes out as something else. The turret is lifted away. The main gun disappears with it. The circular turret ring remains open above the hull. Inside is space. Not luxurious space. Not comfortable space. Enough space. Enough for infantry to ride inside armor that had once been built to protect a tank crew. This is the mature Kangaroo concept. The vehicle still has tracks, still has a powerful engine, still has heavy armor compared with lighter troop carriers. But it no longer thinks like a tank. There is no main gun to point toward a German position. No turret crew searching for enemy armor. Its main weapon is the infantry inside. That sounds poetic. On the battlefield, it is practical. The Kangaroo carries troops across terrain that a truck should not cross under fire. It follows tanks across mud, fields, and broken ground. It can absorb small arms fire and shell fragments that would be devastating to men walking beside it. The soldiers ride low inside the hull. Then, near the objective, they climb out and fight on foot. Simple in theory, less simple in reality. There is no rear ramp, no armored door opening toward cover. The men have to climb over the side or through the open top. That means the moment of dismount can be dangerous. If German machine guns are already watching, the very act of getting out can expose them. The interior is cramped. Configurations vary. Passenger capacity varies by source and period. The vehicle is an adaptation, not a standardized modern APC. Protection also has limits. The open top means air bursts and artillery remain dangerous. Mines can break tracks or penetrate the hull. German anti-tank guns can still kill the vehicle. A Panther does not suddenly become harmless because the Ram has no. The Kangaroo is still made of steel that can be penetrated. The men inside are still soldiers traveling toward a battlefield. This is where the real value of the machine becomes clear. It is not measured by whether every passenger survives every attack. No armored vehicle can promise that. The question is comparison. Would those same men be safer walking across the same field? Would they be safer in a truck? Would they be more likely to arrive beside the tanks if they traveled inside a tracked armored hull? That is the problem the Kangaroo answers. Not perfectly, practically. And there is something psychologically important about the empty turret ring. At the beginning of the story, it looks like absence. Something has been taken away. Firepower removed. Capability lost. Now the meaning has reversed. The empty ring means infantry can fit inside. The missing gun creates the machine's purpose. A British soldier looking at the vehicle months after Totalize no longer needs to ask why someone would remove the turret. The more important question is what Britain does next. Because admiration can be exaggerated. Memories can change. Quotes can be misremembered. But armies reveal what they believe in through organization. And Britain is about to give the Canadian Kangaroo a place inside one of the most specialized armored formations in the war. 24 October 1944. Netherlands. By now, the Kangaroo is no longer an emergency experiment. It has survived Normandy. It has survived the first doubts. It has survived the question that follows every battlefield improvisation. Was it actually useful enough to keep? The answer is becoming difficult to ignore. The Canadians formed the 1st Armored Personnel Carrier Regiment, a permanent unit built around the idea, not artillery pretending to be transport, not temporary workshop conversions waiting to be discarded. A regiment whose purpose is to carry infantry forward inside armored vehicles. That changes everything. Temporary ideas disappear when the battle moves on. Useful ideas get names. Crews, command structures, maintenance systems, training, replacement vehicles, and eventually, doctrine. The Kangaroo is moving from improvisation to institution. That is the strongest kind of battlefield endorsement. Not applause, not admiration, commitment. Then comes the British response. The Canadian regiment is assigned to the British 79th Armoured Division. That detail matters. The 79th is not an ordinary armored division by this stage of the war. It has become associated with specialized armored vehicles designed to solve specific battlefield problems. Engineering vehicles, mine-clearing tanks, assault equipment. Machines built not because they look conventional, but because conventional equipment sometimes cannot solve the problem in front of it. The Kangaroo fits that philosophy almost perfectly. This is where the British realization becomes measurable. We do not need to invent a British officer staring at a Canadian Kangaroo and declaring it brilliant. We do not need a dramatic quotation that may never have existed. Armies reveal belief through use, through organization, through what they are willing to place inside formations that matter. The British do not simply watch the Canadians operate Kangaroos. They incorporate the Canadian regiment into one of their most specialized armored organizations. The strange machine has found a home. The empty turret ring no longer needs explanation. The missing gun is no longer the first thing that matters. What matters is what the vehicle can carry. Infantry. British infantry. Canadian infantry. Men who otherwise might have spent more of the approach walking through artillery fragments and machine gun fire. The idea has crossed an important line. At Totalize, the British saw an experiment. Now, British command is treating it as capability. That does not mean every British soldier loves the vehicle. It does not mean every ride is comfortable. It does not mean the machine is safe. There are still disadvantages. The open top, the awkward dismount, the cramped interior, the danger from mines and heavy shells. The Kangaroo has not become elegant simply because a regiment now operates it. But elegance was never the point. The point was getting infantry forward with more protection than they would have on foot. And the British have decided that is useful enough to keep. The proof will soon become even more direct. Because a few months after the strange Canadian machines appeared in Normandy, British infantrymen will climb inside them for another attack. Not to test the idea, to use it. 16 January 1945, approximately 7:30 in the morning. Roar triangle. Winter has transformed the battlefield. Fog hangs low. The ground is wet. Mud grabs at tracks. Snow lies across parts of the landscape. Roads and fields disappear into gray. German positions wait beyond villages, woods, streams, and defensive ground. Operation Blackcock is beginning, and British infantrymen are climbing into Canadian Kangaroos. Months earlier, the sight would have been strange. A tank without a turret. A machine apparently missing the very weapon that justified its armor. Now there is less mystery. The men climb in because they know what the vehicle is for. Get them closer. Keep them with the tanks. Protect them from some of the fire that would otherwise reach them before the real infantry fight begins. That is all. But sometimes that is enough. Canadian crews of the 1st Armored Personnel Carrier Regiment are now supporting British formations during the operation. Among the British infantry carried in Kangaroos are men of the Devonshire Regiment. The transformation is complete. British troops are no longer observing a Canadian experiment. They are passengers inside it. The machine has moved from Canadian workshop floor to British battlefield routine in only a few months. The conditions around them make the original Kangaroo problem return in a different form. Winter movement is slow. Fog limits visibility. Mud can channel vehicles onto roads and tracks. German artillery can search those routes. Machine guns and anti-tank weapons remain dangerous. The Kangaroo does not remove those threats. It carries men through some of them. That distinction remains important. At Bachhoven, 6 Kangaroos carrying D Company are detached, with tanks of the Royal Tank Regiment, in response to the possibility of a German counterattack. The scene itself shows how far the idea has come. These vehicles are being used as part of a combined arms response. Tanks, infantry, Kangaroos, Canadian crews, British soldiers. The relationship the Canadians tried to protect at Totalize is now becoming normal enough to be employed again under new conditions. Then the battlefield reminds everyone what armor cannot do. During the night of 16 to 17 January, German shelling strikes the area. Men seek whatever protection the vehicles and ground can provide. Several are wounded. Canadian trooper Henry George Johnston is killed. This matters, because innovation stories can become dangerous when the machine starts sounding magical. The Kangaroo is not magic. It cannot stop every shell. It cannot make a soldier invulnerable. It cannot guarantee that a man who climbs inside will return. Johnston's death is part of the story for exactly that reason. Steel reduces certain risks. It does not end them. For British infantry, the realization is therefore more mature than simple admiration. The Kangaroo is useful because war is dangerous, not because it makes war safe. A shell can still kill. A mine can still break a track. An anti-tank gun can still penetrate the hull. A soldier climbing over the side can still be hit. But the alternative is often crossing more of the same ground exposed. That is the comparison that matters. By January 1945, no one needs to explain why the turret is missing before every mission. The empty ring has become familiar. The missing gun has become space. The space has become protection. And the protection now carries British troops toward German positions. Months earlier, the question had been, why would the Canadians remove the weapon? Now the answer is sitting inside the vehicle. 1945. Northwest Europe. Look at the Kangaroo from above. The first thing you notice is what is not there. No turret. No main gun. An empty ring where a tank's most obvious weapon once stood. At the beginning of this story, that emptiness looked like damage, like something unfinished, like someone had taken a functioning armored vehicle and made it less dangerous. By 1945, the meaning is completely different. The empty space is the reason the machine exists. The story began with a battlefield problem. Tanks could cross ground under protection that infantry did not have. The infantry needed the tanks. The tanks needed the infantry. But German machine guns, mortars, and artillery could separate them before they reached the objective. The Canadians did not invent the idea of armored troop transport. Armies had already used protected carriers before Normandy. What they did was take armored hulls already available to them and apply that protection differently. First, the M7 priests. Take the gun out. Clear the fighting compartment. Put infantry inside. Dozens converted in days. Send them into Totalize. The first attack does not prove everything. Totalize itself becomes confused and costly. Canadian units suffer heavily. German resistance remains dangerous. The Kangaroo does not solve navigation. It does not destroy German anti-tank guns. It does not prevent tactical mistakes. It does not make infantry invincible. It solves one problem: getting more infantry through more of the approach while protected by armor. That problem is important enough that the idea survives. Then comes the ram. This time the Canadians literally take the turret off. The thing that makes the vehicle look most like a tank disappears. And suddenly the transformation makes sense. They took the turrets off. Not because the turret had no value, because for this job the men inside had more. The experiment becomes a unit. The unit becomes part of Britain's 79th Armored Division. British troops ride inside Canadian Kangaroos. The machine moves from emergency improvisation to battlefield system. That progression tells us more than any dramatic quotation could. The British did not need to say they were impressed. They used it. And still, the machine remains imperfect. The top is open. The ride is cramped. Getting out can expose the passengers. Heavy weapons can destroy it. Mines can stop it. Shells can still kill men around it. The Kangaroo is not remembered because it made soldiers safe. No machine in that war could do that. It matters because it changed the odds during one of the most vulnerable parts of an infantry attack. The journey toward the fight. There is something almost symbolic about what the Canadians removed. Most military development adds more armor, more gun, more speed, more ammunition. The Kangaroo is remembered because someone looked at an armored vehicle and decided subtraction could create capability. Remove the gun. Remove the turret. Use the space. Protect the infantry. Not a better tank. A different machine. By the end, the empty turret ring no longer looks empty. Inside it are helmets, rifles, British infantry, Canadian infantry, men being carried toward a battlefield where they will still have to climb out and fight. That is what the Canadians had really built. Not an armored vehicle missing its purpose, a vehicle with a new one. And the British did not have to say what they thought of the Canadian idea. In the end, their soldiers were riding in